Welcome to Poets House. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Rob Arnold. I'm the executive director here. I'm really grateful to all of you for making room for poetry in your evenings, in your lives this evening. Poetry is our singular purpose here at Poets House, but I know it's not your singular purpose necessarily, so it's extra special that you're going to be joining us this evening. When I say poetry is our singular purpose here, what I mean is that we're leaning into the possibility of poetry. We're leaning into the connectedness of it, the imagination of it. And we do that through our educational programs, through our library upstairs of over 100,000 books of poetry, and of course through thought-provoking and emotionally rich programs like this evening's. So we're also a rare space in a very expensive and growing more expensive every day city that is entirely cost optional. So it matters so much more that you're here this evening and that Emily has done this beautiful thing of donating book sales to Poets House. So thank you, Emily, for that. And finally, we're entirely dedicated to the irrepressible humanity of poetic expression. And that was a thing that a couple years ago I didn't need to say, but now I do. So that is the reality that we're living in now. And our featured reader tonight, speaking of irrepressible humanity, knows all about that. Her poems are brimming with the messy beauty of an embodied existence. And her latest collection, My Wise Little Ghost, gives voice to that searching complexity. We are honored to be celebrating that book and its author, Emily Hyland, this evening. Emily is a poet, mindful movement teacher, and restaurateur. She's the author of 2 other books currently, but multiple more coming. Divorced Business Partners, A Love Story, which was released in 2024, and Emily the Cookbook in 2018. Her 3rd poetry collection, Breasts, it is the word breasts with a strikeout through it, will be published by Cornerstone Press in 2027. That is 3 books of poetry in 3.5 years. That is really incredible, actually. Hyland is the eponymous co-founder of the international restaurant groups Pizza Loves Emily and Emmy Squared Pizza. She lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where she co-owns and directs Yoga Source, a beloved studio where she teaches an array of movement classes through the lens of poetry and hosts writing workshops and a reading series. Emily is going to be joined this evening in conversation and in poetry by Lo Naylor, a poet and filmmaker from Salt Lake City, winner of the 2025 Plowshares Emerging Writers Contest in Poetry. Lo earned an MFA from NYU in 2025 and holds a BA in Art History and Visual Arts from Columbia University. Her award-winning films have screened internationally at major festivals, aired on the BBC, and are available for streaming. Lo's work has been supported by the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, Tin House, New York Foundation for the Arts, and is featured on the Slowdown, like the poetry podcast, so that's pretty incredible. Recent poems are forthcoming in Poetry, Plowshares, the Southern Review, Georgia Review, the Detroit Journal, Narrative, and in Best New Poets 2025, among others. They live and work in Brooklyn. So please join me in welcoming Emily Hyland and Lo Naylor.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here with me. I'm so excited to support this beautiful poet and this beautiful book. Everyone, please grab one if you don't have one on the way out. I'll remind you again. Emily and I have a long history, which is really special, and it started here at Poets House when we were together in a virtual workshop during COVID through Poets House with Patricia Spears Jones, a wonderful poet. I got one major gift from that workshop, and that was Emily. I got to keep her, and I was so wowed by her work at that time. I was new to poetry. In fact, it was my first poetry workshop. She was so welcoming to me, but also I was so stunned by her unflinching honesty and her incredible craft and her ability to tell stories in a way that is both captivating for any reader, but that also brings in her deep knowledge of the history of poetry and poetic craft, which you will see when she reads her poems today. I'm going to read just one poem of my own, which is a poem I brought into that first workshop. And it's a poem that was actually my first poem, a very raw poem that Emily sort of helped me feel I had license to speak this honestly. Content warning, it involves suicide. It's called You'd Be 30. You'd be 30 today, but you did it at last, and I wish I could just say that to you. You did it at last, I'd say, and you'd laugh. Yeah, I guess I did. I'm sorry. And then you'd be here, like the time the rope broke. I thought you'd done it. I mean, your text said goodbye and why. But the third hospital said hold, and then your strangled voice. I wish it had worked. This time it worked, and I thought about atoms in endless motion, their performance of permanence, while you waited in the crematorium in an impossibly tiny cardboard coffin. I slipped a note in, opening it no more than a crack, and didn't hear you say, I love you, or goodbye. Outside, while you combusted into particles, I played the voicemail you'd left on my birthday over and over, as if each undulation of your voice could delete a fiber of the burning cardboard, could delete the weapon, could delete your need for one, could undelete you. I knew after 6 tries, some of them aborted or not quite lethal, or the car was spotted, your stomach pumped just in time, and you never did have the money for the gun. Still, after 6, I knew if there were 7, that would be it. I'll take you to her, the mortician said when I returned to collect you, and he gestured toward a pedestal lit by a spotlight guarded by a velvet rope. I froze because the absurdity. Also, the urn had a loose-looking latch, and I asked, is it locked? He smiled. She's in a sealed plastic bag, inside a velvet bag, inside a cardboard box, inside the urn. And, my God, I miss your face. I promise I won't make you stay. Just sit with me a bit. Smoke one last cigarette. We'll watch it flicker with your breath. Watch the ash collect. So I feel like this poetry collection encompasses so much beyond grief, but its genesis is in a way of a form of grief that I find very brave for Emily to have delved into. I think with the emphasis on the right to choose around abortion and the clarity of a decision being right might close off a mind to the idea of what grief could follow something right. And Emily has so bravely delved into this, and the poem she's created, you're about to hear, will exemplify that. So, Emily, let's hear from you. I would love you to start with a poem called Blueberry, from a series that I think probably everyone here has heard or seen those apps where it's like, your fetus is a blueberry, now it's a strawberry, now it's a clementine. And Emily has a series that sort of follows along with that progression of a fetus as fruit. But we get to see how that, has a different experience for her when she's watching her sister's fetus grow, and how it returns her to a place where she encounters the grief of a fetus that didn't.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, so much for being here. People from all walks of my life and so many strangers who I hope will soon be friends. I think the idea of grief is so important in terms of this that you were talking about, just because there seems to be this general assumption in the pro-life camp that people who make this really challenging choice, don't take it seriously and don't mourn it. And that's a lot of the work that I did in this book, is that I didn't want to make this decision, and it was the only way forward in my life, and that's harrowing and something that we move through. So I very much am interested in the advocacy work that this book can do for women and their right to make choices in our fucking bodies. This week, Poppy is a blueberry. And so Poppy was the name that we started with my niece as a poppy seed. So she became Poppy while she was in utero. This week, Poppy is a blueberry. She's on her way to bean-sized heartbeat on the ultrasound. Dune sends me a picture of her circled in purple. 7 years ago, Dune biked over from Bushwick with ice cream from a bodega pit stop in her front basket and a pregnancy test in her backpack. A good sister covers all bases. And when I was done peeing and the line showed us, and even though Brad was already living at his brother's place, our last fuck, it seems, had set in motion after the blur of a trattoria dinner in the flower district, when we both didn't understand what was happening as it was happening, and we were unnodding even though we were used to being nodded, so our bodies needed the tangle in uncertainty. And after wine, a new cluster of cells, our zygote. And even though I knew and Dune knew I wouldn't allow who had come to be to pass through into earth form, Dune and I still held each other's upper arms and jumped up and down with joy at the news. It's not that I didn't want her. I couldn't hand her over, take turns, hold her absence so early in her life. She was already gone those nights I imagined Brad bottle feeding her a neighborhood away.
Thank you. There's an incredible sentence in this poem. I don't know if you caught it. It just tumbles on, and the syntax nodding itself and extending as we kind of learn this outcome of the test, which I hope you caught, and if not, when you get the book, reread Blueberry to catch it. Emily, I'd love for you to talk about the experience of your sister's pregnancy and how it evoked the grief from your abortion, and sort of at what point did these poems come into being in that process?
I mean, it's so interesting. Kate, where are you? It's so interesting that you're here. Kate is this amazing Rolfer who I worked with many years while I lived in the city, and I think that the poems were already gestating as we were doing that bodily work, even though it was totally off of the level of intellectual awareness, but it was there in the body and through your hands and helping me heal in that way. And then it really was once she was pregnant, it was like, oh, I had life in my body, and I never allowed myself to consider that. Hi, Steph. Thanks for being here. And I didn't even realize that. How could I not allow myself to realize that? That's how much I was in avoidance of those feelings. I found out I was pregnant the week after my husband left of 16 years. And so it was an impossible circumstance I was in. And I was in the middle of a harrowing divorce, and that was consuming all of the emotional space. And it was just head down, get through this, take care of yourself. And then when her pregnancy, I guess that was 7-8 years later, emerged, all of this stuff woke up in me, and I was in a much more tuned in proprioceptive space to really feel into what had been there and start moving through what that meant, which I still don't fully know.
Well, you know a lot here. What's so interesting is that you were open to that. You were open emotionally for yourself, but you were also open artistically to follow different pathways and where it might lead. And it sounds like, what we see is kind of something that's crystallized, but I'm so curious in the process of getting there, and in some ways we're kind of following some of the stages of grief, one of which is a return to the past to understand, and some of these poems delve into the origin story, back to the marriage that was dissolving. And I was wondering if you'd read 3 that sort of represent in my mind that excavation into the past and kind of experiencing the past as present. We'll talk a little more about that after, but if you'd read Pull, Peach, and Last Morning.
Sure. Pull. It's not that I used the abortion as a threat. I prayed it granted some sort of cosmic leverage, as if our pregnancy, a week after 16 years broke between us, would be an obvious reason he'd return. Back in college, right as we met, I started the clock of pills in the pink plastic circle. My pheromones put off a scent he really liked to bend over a counter and fuck. All those years, I couldn't come without deep concentration. His fingers or tongue rarely felt like pleasure. My mind had to wander away from him, turning my head to where he wasn't and closing my eyes. So my hormones could just be my hormones. I stopped birth control on my 30th birthday. After the contraceptives, whatever fracture already grew in my inadvertent flinches and the sheets between us brightened. He was left to only pull out, and that offered a certain risk. So he gambled with potential for family. For 4 years, he only came outside of me, alone, dripping onto the fat rump of my ass, never in me. I think he never knew my real smell until those last years when my chemistry was of its own wisdom and we further repelled. I think he wanted to love me. That last night together, our interlock exploded. Eye to eye, he was on top of me in ferocity, and we let it happen, fused as if the moment consented to what we hadn't. I swear I took Plan B the next morning, or maybe convinced myself I did, but never walked that aisle to the pharmacy counter. I think we ambled around the reservoir that afternoon, and I gave him my ring back. Any manipulation I could muster, said some begging, pathetic things. If I'd been him, I too might have cringed as he did at the stench of the desperation that had once been his wife. It makes sense. Once pregnant, I felt a wild power in the timing. The timing felt like a glimmer. I kept testing. I'm having the abortion. I'm going through with it. I have an appointment. Dangling her life is a reason I pleaded. I waited as long as I could. And so now, this week, Poppy is a peach. And I ate fruit moth larvae alive inside the first apricots from the sapling we planted next to the peach tree this spring. I plucked all the ripest ones off the branchlings right into my mouth. Barefoot at dawn, delightful, indulgent, spat pits out, and walking into the house, pulled one apart to get a look at the fresh flare of summer's early flesh, about to wake Jim with this sweet gift, and horrored a whitish pre-pupil wormer squirming, 2 mouth hooks like eyes. I'd already eaten at least 10. Now I tear at the others I'd piled next to the sink, rabid and sick to know each one holds a larva slipping through its middle. I wake Jim anyway, running to our room with the affront like a broken egg, cupped in my palms. Swift to wake into task, he assures from a quick Google search, the maggots will die as I digest. I'm gagging. I'd waited all season for the trees to plump heavy with sunny luster. I can barely look at them now, dangling golden treats. The neighbor's crop spills onto my driveway. The car savors its roll over them on the way in and out, pulping their yielding mess onto the hot bricks, killing whatever's inside. Last morning, what was it like for her in those last moments she was still possible? We woke, she felt toothbrush bristles scour night from my mouth, felt my body balance on one leg as I stepped my way into pants. She crossed from Brooklyn to Manhattan, felt the speed of wheels accelerate with an engine's finesse, arched over water in the architectural marvel of a bridge and up into midtown clamor, traffic pushing back against the start time of her appointment. She sat in my body in a lobby chair, started disappearing as my fingers typed an email to Brad. I couldn't text. He'd recently blocked my number. No subject, just, I don't want to do this. He wrote right back, where are you? And then I didn't respond.
Thank you. So I think you can all see this incredible radical truth telling that Emily is so movingly doing. I would love to hear about how that, have you always written with such honesty? And how does it, how does it feel as a process, and how does it feel as a performer of your art form?
Yes, I have always written with such honesty. I came to poetry in 7th grade with my English teacher, Mrs. Berrien, and we did a chapbook unit for National Poetry Month. And I had recently had a horrible best friend divorce where my friends just, did that mean girl 7th grade thing. And I got to write my feelings in that chapbook, which I still have. It's called Best Friends, with the little heart broken in two. And I got to stand in front of the classroom and read how hurt I was and have that validated. And this form of writing and being able to hold space for moving through that hard stuff has been invaluable to me ever since. And so, aside from craft, craft is a beautiful facet of this. At its heart for me, this is just being able to get what I'm feeling out of my body, move it through onto the page, and just do clearing and processing work.
Yeah, and that's amazing. We'll talk in a little bit more about, as you moved through this collection, some of the other avenues for that kind of access to self and catharsis. I'm curious about Peach, because I think this poem is amazing to me, because when we're grieving, it's as if the world presents us with our grief at every turn, so that every object becomes related to our grief. And this peach becomes such a objective correlative of what is going on for the speaker at that time. I find also that you're seeking for Daisy's voice very interesting in here as well, and we can talk about where that moves. But I'm curious about Peach. When you saw, what's your process of moving from this object in the world has presented me with something, and then moving it into poetic form?
I think it's happening just very much in real time. I mean, that particular poem, I think, is very inspired by Sharon Olds and the way she talks about losing a child. And I'm blanking on the name of the poem, of course, but she is bleeding onto the floor and an accident happens outside the window, and that becomes the extended metaphor for the feeling that she and her husband are having. And there's another poem where she's picking her kids up from camp and she's worried she's going to run over the little kids, and there's a harrowing sense of loss that lives in the way she deals with not having gone through with or losing a pregnancy. And I feel like that particular poem is inspired by her in the subtext more so than literally the peach. But it's the baby's the size of a peach, the peach tree's there next to the apricot tree, I'm eating the apricots, I have this experience, and then it emerges. That was a poem that was very much born as opposed to made, as Janine would say, Stanley Kunitz would say. Some poems are born and some are made. So that was born.
I'm glad you brought up Sharon Olds, because I feel like you definitely have a kinship with her in your work. Not derivative of, but definitely in conversation. Particularly the way you're able to talk about bodies and the experience of being in a body in such a visceral way that feels so relatable on the page. So that's incredible. I feel that as you're in your own body, you're also reaching in this last morning, the last poem she read, reaching towards this other fetus, clump of cells, would-be body, would-be person, to enter that experience. And that's where the manuscript becomes sort of polyphonic. And there are poems that begin to take on the voice of this would-be child. And I'd love to hear from you the process of how that emerged, what it was like to experience her voice, and how you conceive of it as separate from your own within the poetic language.
Yeah, so Just over 3 years ago, I had a preventative double mastectomy with reconstruction, and I felt very like Frankenstein, disoriented. You know, they took the fat from here to reconstruct. I can't feel here. There's scars everywhere. And so my doctor, my therapist, my husband, many people had recommended psychedelic therapy work, predominantly with MDMA, to reacclimate relationally in terms of that. So that was the doorway into psychedelic therapy. And then from there, I graduated into high-dose psilocybin mushroom therapy. And that was something I had never had an experience with before. I was very hesitant to move into that space, and it changed my life because I've been since 7th grade in these narrative talk therapy loops where nothing is actually shifting. And then this finally allowed for neuroplasticity, for understanding there's more to perception than just what I see and feel, you know, with my senses and my body. And so I had my first somatic therapy experience where I, just as the mushrooms hit, as literally as you'll believe me, I crawled into the fetal position and I started screaming, and I felt like the cell clump of who would have been my daughter cleaving to my tissue and my tissue cleaving back to her right at the moment before Twilight took over on the abortion table. And it was too late at that point. And the path forward was the path forward for whatever her energy out there is. And for me at this time, you know, in my life right now. But her voice then emerged after that. A few weeks later, I was in a yin yoga class, and my yoga teacher was reading from the Radiance Sutras, which are the beautiful voices of Shiva and Shakti interweaving the different binaries of the universe and out there in the cosmos. And this voice just spilled, again, a poem that was born. I got up and got paper and a pen and just started writing, and out came her voice. And so she co-authored this book, and it feels like a channel. It does not feel like a persona. And so, yeah.
Let's hear her voice. The first poem in fact, like a proem for the collection is in Daisy's voice. That's the first voice we encounter in the collection. So let's read that poem, Aspiration.
Sure. Aspiration. I didn't want to go. I didn't want her to let me go. I don't want to do this, she blubbered, whimpering her way on the slow walk we took into the procedure room, walking herself into survival, walking me to folds my gamble for breath, and she knew it. Then we were on the stainless table, and the part of her that was the bundle of what I was inside her center hewed firm, and the whole of her tissue's universe cleaved me to stay put. But twilight relaxed her away from any last-minute intuition, and I couldn't grasp my locus once the vacuum revved and steered its tube eye through her cervix and fixed its steady gaze on me.
Oof. So we talked a bit about how Daisy's voice sort of progressed as you continued these treatments and had more and more access to it. I'd love to hear how it felt to encounter it initially, and then maybe a little around the progression of that voice, and we'll read a couple more, Swaddle, and then Who I Wasn't.
So I'm in a writing workshop group with Mark Doty, and there's 7 women that have been in that group with me for over 3 years now. And they all just held the space for that to be true. And it would have been very easy for him to be like, okay, Emily, that's just a persona, like, whatever, this isn't how things work. And instead it was, channels happen in artwork, and maybe this is true. And that group of, I'm the youngest in that group by many years, so it feels like a lot of moms and a poetry dad, really held the space for her voice to then come into workshop. And that was the predominant voice that I brought into our workshop group over the course of that period of time. And she they trusted what she had to say and were very respectful of it, especially in the process of giving feedback for suggestions and revision. And yeah, her voice was edited very lightly with a very thoughtful eye to being respectful to whatever that is that came through. Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible that they created that space. It's sort of like that. I don't know if when you do improv and it's always yes and I think that's a similar case with poetry. Okay, so what you say is true, and let's follow that. That you were granted that without skepticism to follow it through in a way that allowed for this evolution of her voice. And it's truly a polyphonic collection. I don't know if you've seen in the book, when Daisy speaks, the poems are on the right margin, which gives them a visual distinction. But I think you could probably hear yourselves, the voice is distinct. Let's hear those other two.
Sure. I also would like to just say, I feel like so many of us are invalidated in lots of different ways in our lives. And, one of the things you talked about at the beginning is how we connected because I made you feel safe to bring that into the space. And poetry has become for me a different level of found family, right? This is safe space. Like here at Poets House, the relationships I've built with people like you, Rebecca, and Rob, and seeing Stephen and Kuhu and all these amazing people that we come together and show up and let go of the bullshit we were taught, like tamp your voice down, stop, that's not true, is not part of this. And so I feel very safe in this particular field and very grateful for it. So thank you all. Okay. So this is actually the first poem she wrote. This is the one that came out in yoga class. Swaddle. So we had just gotten, during this time while my sister was pregnant, we had adopted a little baby kitten who was a foster fail immediately. So I was raising this kitten as she was cooking her baby. And so this is about him. Swaddle. It was marketed to her on Instagram, the wearable pet swaddle, and she's wearing it. I'd roll my eyes if I'd ever had them, swaddling her little kitten against her chest in the waiting room at the vet for his first checkup. Jim, like a good dad, sits next to her, holds the car keys and scrolls. What human performance to cradle this furry surrogate, to open herself up to my presence on psychedelic therapy days as if I'd actually come to meet her. Last time, she thought I took the form of the stained glass pixie figurine that catches light in the sunroom. She thought I was playing piano. It was just some artist on Spotify who actually has fingers, slender and long, that cross over keys, that press to lift dampers so the hammer strikes string. Cause, then action, from motion to sound, from the stress of yowl to her high-pitched baby voice babble, kissing the cat's crown, whispering, "It's okay," over and over. Maybe I didn't want her, didn't want to pass through into her life, to endure her particularity, helicoptering over homework, scolding Jim for letting me play too many hours of video games in the room with no windows in the middle of the house. Maybe she couldn't have handled who I would have come to be, to have someone surpass her. Maybe I wanted a different life beyond what she could offer and that she'll never get to know. So Lo and I were talking earlier about how her voice really evolves. She goes from this space of being angry and processing in that way with me to maturing, I feel like, whatever that even means, as she figures out who she is out there, wherever that is. And so this is her second to last poem in the book, where she really is talking about what her poetic voice is. Who I wasn't. I would have had a widow's peak and blackish curls, unlike hers, and dark brown eyes. More of what he handed down, basic parts I don't need now or never did. I've never been but shimmering, on the cusp, then got to be even more a shimmering. Not embodied form like the kids he has who aren't hers, big already 4 and 2. When the eldest was born, she couldn't bear what it meant, how the baby looked a bit how I would have looked. He sends her pictures now of his daughter doing things, holding a balloon at a party. She waddles in a tutu in the grass the moment after she's smashed a handful of cake into her baby mouth. They already knew my name long before that night I was conceived, landed on it years prior in a happy chat. Daisy, our Daisy. And they did create the circumstance for my chance. As you know, I can know of cake, but not its taste. Won't ever have a need for cloth to wipe my face. I need her to let the me she thinks be like the sand eroded from a sandstone mound, for my name to break from reach, not named being, daughter, Daisy. The wind brings my meaning as my is. I only reduce to language for your understanding. After she reads my words aloud in the online workshop group, Mark emailed her some notes, recognized me as myself. I love your wise little ghost, he wrote. He's my teacher, too. She's not the one who knows me most. You all do.
Thank you, Mark, for saying wise little ghost, because I think that's just an incredible description of this voice we're all hearing. I'm curious what it was like for you to encounter that and how that encounter changed your grieving process or your healing process or your poetic process.
Encountering her voice. Once the poems started coming, I wanted more. And there was a moment where I was like, I'm not going to write any more poems from my perspective. I'm just going to let her write. And as soon as that happened, no more came. For the last poem in the book came like a year later. It's been complicated. It feels strange that the most tangible her is this book. Like, it was very weird when I got my first physical copy of this book. It felt like her. But she wasn't meant to be here in a body. We were meant to be in whatever this is that we're in. I haven't received any poems since the book was written, and it feels like a next stage of whatever the grief process, the healing process, or the allowing process to carry on. So it felt right. I felt like, my life has changed so much. I never thought I would be somebody who would be in a place where I'm so in tune and connected to my breath and my body and life around me and what is here. So who knows? Maybe I'll meet her again, but we met in this very beautiful time. I was telling folks, I live in Santa Fe, and so I had a reading there a few weeks ago, and the last poem in the book takes place, I was on the beach at a retreat, and all of a sudden she came through, and I got stung by a bee, and it felt like she was channeling into my body in that way. And then I was on retreat with Marie Howe and Ellen Bass last year. These were both at wow, I have no words anymore, at the Pacific Ocean. And I was standing chatting with some woman on the beach having a conversation, and her little puppy runs over, and the puppy's collar just said Daisy. And it was like these two instances at the beach on the Pacific Ocean, more and more distant from the book, are when she's just like had this moment of saying hello.
Well, thank you to her for bringing this book to us. So I'm thinking of this now as a project, and I know you've called yourself at times like a project poet, where you kind of conceive of what you're doing earlier on in the process, as some other poets might. And I noticed that these series you have, the Poppy as a Blueberry Kumquat series, and then Daisy's Voice series, really scaffold the manuscript in such a lovely way for us to move through. And I think we have some poets in the room who might also be interested in how you thought about compiling the manuscript. At what point did the series take shape? And how much of this happened before poems were written or after?
So when I'm writing on a topic, it just seems to be my focal point that this is what I'm writing into. Like right now I'm writing into like deep disordered eating and running, right? And like processing that. And like every time I go for a run, it's like, okay, like 8.5 miles, what am I learning? 10 miles, what am I learning? And like, that's, to use your word, the scaffolding that's giving me a container in which to understand what I'm thinking about, what I'm coming to know as a human at this time in my life. And will all of those wind up in the book? Maybe none of them. At this point, none of those will. It's like a lot of like shedding some of this stuff too and clearing space. And so I think it's like a container for me to think about this idea that I'm chewing on and developing and refining. And her voice wasn't intentional. Like a lot of these poems were born. They just came out when they came out. This book was written over the course of like 6.5 months, I feel like. From the beginning of my sister's pregnancy until just before the 3rd trimester was the bulk of it. So it came to be. And I feel like what's interesting is in Divorced Business Partners, in my first book, one of the poems that I wrote in that workshop with you was called Daisy. And I think you had actually commented on really liking that one. And that was the seeds of the processing live in that book. And then this project is like, oh, okay, so that's me dealing with the divorce, and there's nuggets of this abortion that I am going to come to start to tease out, whether I don't think that's as conscious as much as like, okay, this is where my learning and development is going. And I'm very much in my body. So yeah, then it's like I had this mastectomy and I'm writing through all of that. And then there was space for these poems and what's next, and thank God for therapy, because then it brings up all these things that are fodder for lots of poems.
Well, the process is working. You're so prolific. It's incredibly impressive. I think it's really cool in this book how there's a moment, and I'm going to ask Emily to read this poem, where we also get a zoom out, where it's, as the process of writing these poems and compiling these poems and sharing them in workshop and working with Mark, Emily writes a poem where she steps back and that enters as well, which brings another layer of depth to the manuscript, but also is a perfect poem perhaps to read last, because it brings us back to this very place.
Yes, it does. So Poets House is where I came back to writing poetry with Delana Dameron, who died not too long ago. So Delana, thank you for that workshop here. And then I had the privilege of reading with Mark and meeting him for the first time in person here at Poets House when my first book came out a few years ago. So one of the last poems from this book emerged from that day. I was sitting right here. And this is called 3rd Trimester, Many Worlds, Poets House. All the characters here together tonight, Poppy in Dune's belly, Dune, Dad, and Mark, here to talk with me about my book with Daisy on the pages. It's the only time I'm seeing Dune while she's pregnant, the first time I'm meeting Mark outside a screen. What an intimate world to know other bodies from a distance so well through technologies of circuits and blood before knowing arms around arms or the weight of a newborn in a lap. How lucky I am for this art, lineage of flesh and words together to listen and talk in a place where elders have circled around the fire of lines and sung them, as has Daisy, before Poppy will ever know song. Vibrational, it's still womb work for her. And here we all are, chairs of bodies, attuning to rhythm, part of the rhythm, Poppy's heartbeat sacred, the flat line of Daisy's name in my table of contents sacred. None of this sacred, but to our complicated hearts. We all carry everything carried before us. Recognize how small this gesture of ritual is. The writing, the reading, the conversation. Against the edge of the island, where outside the river rolls into the ocean. Wave song, whale song, luminescence down where sunlight doesn't reach.
Let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you.
So thank you, everyone here, for being part of this community. Thank you, Emily, for being one of the first people to welcome me into the community and being one of my biggest supporters still to this day. I feel so lucky. I feel so lucky to get to talk about this beautiful book. Please buy a copy of it. All proceeds go to Poets House. So let's participate in this pretty sacred community that has been built and that I feel honored to be part of.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.